Welcome to Introductory Logic Lesson 1, Purposes and Types of Definitions. So there are 6 purposes and 5 types of definitions. But before we get into the definitions, we need to first distinguish the difference between terms and definitions. So a term is a concept that is expressed precisely in one or more words. It's really important to understand that at its core, a term is a concept. It's not a word. Words are just used to precisely express that concept. One way to think of this is it's kind of like what's the mental act. In traditional logic 1, you'll start looking at mental acts and verbal acts. But for the sake of right now, we won't get into that. Just keep in mind that a term is a mental act, and its core, it's a concept that a word is put to in order to precisely express that concept or idea. So a single term or concept or idea can be expressed by many different words. I drew a picture to explain this here. So, all right, let's see. Yep, this is the right way. All right, so if you think of the picture is the concept or idea. It's the term, is the mental act of this picture that you see. And if you see down here, we have girl, puela, lass, which these are all different words that can be used to express the term. And these are actually just different languages, English, Latin, Irish, Scottish base right there. But if you see multiple words that still express the same term. Now we also, there can be a single word that can express more than one term, which would be the concept or idea. Here's an example. Don't mind my picture. This is the best I could do. Okay, hold on. Let me see if this is the right direction. Yep. Okay, so if you see here, we have a word, which is mad. That one word can be used to describe multiple concepts, ideas, or terms. So it could be used to describe angry, which is my little angry bird, or crazy, which is the Joker. So one word can be used to describe multiple terms there. Now, this is one I just threw real quick together. This is what's going on in my house right now. This one here, booty. Booty is one word. It can be used to describe stolen pirate treasure or a butt. Okay, so I keep telling my kid to quit saying booty. And he's like, no, I'm talking about this because he's singing I Like Big Booties. Because he listens to Weird Al, and now which is the Weird Al song is like Big Bibles. But he's trying to use big booty. And he's doing this exact thing here where he's like, no, I'm using a different word for a different term, you know. But so that's an example of how that can be differences there. So now we have that established. We've got what a term is. It's the mental, at its core, it's the concept that we put a word to. And then the definition of a term is a statement of words that gives meaning to the term. So if you can think of words as the tools that you're using for both terms and definitions, a term is a concept or idea expressed precisely by a word, one or more words, and the definition is a statement of words that gives the meaning of the term. All right, so now we can move into the 6 different types, 6 purposes of definitions and 5 types of definitions. Purpose number 1 is definitions show relationship. So when a term is defined properly, the definition often gives some idea of the relationship the term has with other terms. For example, man is a rational animal. So this is a definition that, again, we see in traditional logic 1. I believe it's Socrates who they started to make these branches of characteristics in order to really categorize and define things that exist. And there's multiple characteristics that go into this branch, but this is a definition that comes from that. A man is a rational animal. So what this does is it distinguishes the relationship between a man and other relational beings, such as angels, demons, God. But it also ties a relationship between man and other animals, such as bears, whales, and lizards. We can break that down further and say, okay, well, in the relationship with the rational beings, which would be God, angel, demons, that would be spiritual, unseen. And if we look at animals, that would be material and seen. So that those words connect man with two different categories: rational beings and the animals. So you see how the definition can tie relationship there. Number 2 purpose is definitions remove ambiguity. Now, ambiguous means that there can be more than one meaning. So this is actually where most arguments get hung up on, because if you really listen, especially with kids, I've noticed this in my own kids and honestly with among spouses, where an argument will happen because you're actually talking about two different ways of defining a word. So this is why it's really important in debate, or when you're setting up an argument, which is like a debate, that you define terms first. You want to come to an agreement of what how you're defining a word, so then you can actually discuss material and not just what are we talking about with this word. So for an example here, Jesus' command to love enemies. This is the example the book gives. So it is not thinking, we're not defining love. An argument can come up in this way. We're not defining love as thinking that person is nice, or we are also not defining love as affirming, agreeing, or accepting behavior. Rather, how the love is defined here would be treating the other person lawfully from the heart. So that's a very big difference there. And that's another one where how you define love, whether it's across culture or worldview, philosophies, or religious aspects, even in just basic, without worldview, there's 4 basic types of love. So it's important to even understand the difference between that. And this would be an example of how really defining that word and how you're using it will set you up for success. You can still disagree, but at least you're understanding what you're both talking about. So this leads us to the first type of definition, which is the lexical definition. These are definitions that show relationships or reduce ambiguity by providing a single established meaning. When we say lexical definition, we mean what you find in the dictionary. All right, purpose number 3, definitions reduce vagueness. Vague means that it's unclear the extent. So like the meaning you might know what the meaning is, but the extent of the meaning might be unclear. So this is very situational. So for example, the word tall, we know what tall means. Now, how you describe a tall man would not be the same in how you describe a tall tree. So in order for a man to be tall, maybe like 6'5", if a tree were to be tall, 6'5" would not be a tall tree. So the word, we know what the word means, but it's very dependent on the situation. So it's usually happens a lot with descriptive words. So a way to clear this up would be to add a precising definition, which is the type 2 definition. A precising definition is one that makes clear or specific what was vague. So asking a question such as how big, how warm, how small, and how old will clarify what those terms mean in a given situation. And these are not found in the dictionary. These are very specific to a situation. All right, purpose number 4 is definitions increase vocabulary. So the higher your vocabulary goes, the higher your knowledge goes. So when we can identify subtle distinctions when we really understand words, and the more words we know, we can say like this word is more clearly saying what I'm trying to say than this one. We can distinguish those. It also gives us a proper use of the language. So you want to build your vocabulary because it also helps you to explain things better. Defining terms is a key way of communicating knowledge. So that's why building the vocabulary helps you communicate better and build your knowledge. Now with this one, we have a stipulative definition. So this kind of definition comes when we have new words develop. For example, laptop was not always around because computers were not always around. But now we have one. We have laptops. So now that has been added to the dictionary and vocabulary. So stipulative definitions are definitions that are new words completely, or they are an old word that has a new meaning, which that happens a lot and can cause all kinds of confusion. So it's important to understand those as well. All right, purpose number 5 is definitions explain concepts theoretically. So this is where a word is familiar. So the term and the concept is familiar, but it's not fully understood. So it requires a theory, which a theory is an idea or system of ideas intended to explain something. And these are usually philosophical or scientific. And so, for example, water. Well, we know what water is. We know what it is. But if you were to say H2O, that would be the atomic structure of water. So it's a way of further explaining something that is we know, but we would like to understand more of. Another one that we could get into is man. So let's say, we had our other definition of man, which is a rational animal. Let's say you instead define man as evolved ape. This would completely change where you're starting from, and this would point to a theoretical definition. A theoretical definition is given to a term not fully understood, and it's based on a theory. This is very important for a theoretical definition. It's based on a theory. So when you accept the definition given, you're also accepting the theory that defined it that way. So for example, if you take the definition of man as being evolved from ape, you're also accepting the theory of evolution. Here's God is another one that is often defined many different ways depending on the theory you're coming at it with. You may define God as a man-made imagination. Karl Marx was actually one that kind of took this stance, where he defined religion and believing God like an opium hallucination. So that would be the atheistic theory defining God in that way. Someone else might define God as holy, eternal, creator of all things. Now we would still have to even go further in our definition with that, because in order to distinguish Yahweh, the Christian Judeo God, from other gods that would be considered the creator or eternal from their believers as well. So there still has to be some further definitions there. All right, last, definitions can influence attitudes. This is where persuasive definitions come in. A persuasive definition is meant to persuade the listener one way or another toward the term. So it is to get them to do or believe something. We see this very much in hot topics. I'll just give you an example. 2 hot topics right now, okay? Marriage and abortion. So let's say you define marriage as the institutional slavery of women by men. That's one way to persuade people to think negatively towards marriage. Another person might say marriage is the blessed union of man and wife. So this would be to persuade in a different way. So you see how the wording and the way you define something can cause emotion. Another one would be abortion, and how you would define this one. Let's say you say it's the right of a woman to control her body. Someone else might say slaughter of innocent children. And a non-emotional way might be termination of a pregnancy. But what we could do is to further look into the definitions of those words. These are another good way to get into vocabulary and definitions, and is to look at definitions of words that are in definitions. So for example, here we could look at, what is pregnancy? According to Oxford in 2010, it's of a woman having a baby developing inside her uterus. Okay, so even the non-emotional definition of abortion would say the ending of the baby developing inside the uterus. Slaughter, killing of a large amount of people in a cruel, violent way. And also what's important here too is to consider the reversibility test. The reversibility test states that when you have a definition, if it's clear enough, you should be able to reverse it and see if it makes sense. So if we were to say the right of a woman to control her body is abortion, is that clear enough? Well, to control her body to do what? To what she wears, where she goes, where she lives. So you see, so it's not very clear. So you would want to make it clear, add some details in it to make it clear. So again, we have 6 purposes. Those purposes are to show relationships, remove ambiguity, reduce vagueness, increase vocabulary, explain theories, and to influence attitudes. And the types we have are, let me see here, lexical definitions, precising definitions, stipulative definitions, theoretical definitions, and persuasive definitions. So these are the purposes and types of definitions and why they're very important in reasoning. We'll see you again for the next lesson at a later time.